In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And today we have a super exciting episode. We're going to talk about Joe Biden's recent executive orders regarding marijuana, no less.
Yeah.
Then we're going to discuss some of the unrest happening in the country of Iran. And then we're going to end by having a conversation about democracy, specifically direct democracy, and the potential benefits and drawbacks from a more direct democratic approach to politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really excited for the conversation about direct democracy. Like often it's, we haven't really talked about it very much on this show. Like we haven't talked about it even outside in our planning sessions. So it could be pretty mixed what the results end up being.
Yeah. Speaking of mixed results, Michael, you totally planned that, didn't you?
Yeah.
What are the COVID numbers?
So worldwide, we've hit 627 million total cases, with average daily cases over the last week of 438,000. That's actually up 12% from the week before, when we had about 391,000 on average daily new case rate. In terms of death, we've hit 6.56 million total deaths, with average daily deaths over the last 7 days of 1,156. That's also up 6.4% from the previous week's 1,086. In terms of vaccination, worldwide, we've hit 68.2% of the world's population with one dose, which is up about 0.2% from the week before, where we were at 68%. In the U.S., we've hit 98.6 million total cases, with average daily new cases over the last week of 26,000, which is down about 3.7% from 27,000 the week before. In terms of death in the U.S., we've hit 1.087 million deaths, with average daily deaths over the last 7 days of 230. Now that's up 14% from 202 the week before. And in terms of vaccination, we've hit 79.6% of the population with one dose and 68% who are fully vaccinated, which is about the same as the week before. So kind of like seeing a little bit of a resurgence of like COVID cases worldwide, little uptick in deaths. So kind of really curious to see kind of what this means going into like the fall and the winter, when transmissible diseases tend to, kind of increase. You see growth in flu, growth in other like transmissible diseases as people are like inside more and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens in Q4.
Yeah. Definitely am curious to see what happens in the fall. You know what's interesting about the fall, Mike?
Yeah, what?
There's a lot of leaves. Hey, Speaking of leaves, let's talk about marijuana.
I think you're right, except you don't smoke the leaves.
Speak for yourself.
So we have to hold this. Speak for yourself. Jesus. We have to hold this over until the springtime, when we can make a better transition and talk about, speaking of buds, let's talk about marijuana. So our first segment tonight, as promised, is about weed, and specifically about an announcement, an executive order that the Biden administration came out with last week. So Biden announced that his administration would be putting in place like kind of a 3-step approach to addressing and putting an end to what he called the, quote, failed approach of criminalizing marijuana possession. Now, the first part is the most like direct impact, but if the other two parts are successful, they would be the most important. So let's start with the first one, which is he has announced an executive order and signed the order to pardon all prior federal offenses, simple marijuana possession, and directed the Attorney General to develop an administrative process for the issuance of certificates of pardons for individuals who have, these federal offenses on their records.
Yeah. Now, important context here, because when I first saw this, I thought, holy shit, he's freeing all marijuana offenders from federal prison?
Thing. Yeah, I thought the same
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's not what's happening.
It's
in fact, according to most articles that I've read, it's either not going to free anybody or it's going to free very few people.
Yeah.
The main thing that this does is that it expunges the records, the federal criminal records of people who have been priorly convicted of cannabis. Mm-hmm. So as it stands, about 6,500 people who had been formally convicted of cannabis possession on a federal level would have that record expunged. Now, that's still important because there are a lot of people that, because they have federal felony records, they find it much more difficult to get jobs. All right.
Yeah.
That cannot be overstated. However, if you read this and thought, great, are people whose lives were ruined and are currently sitting and rotting in prison for something as stupid as possessing marijuana, are they finally going to be freed? No, that's not what's going to happen.
Yeah.
All right. And in fact, a huge majority of people who are in prison for marijuana related offenses are not in federal prison.
Yeah.
Most of them are in state prisons, and state prisons cannot be affected by executive action. All right. Biden cannot do an executive order that affects state prisons. And not only that, but it doesn't even necessarily impact every single person who is in prison because of marijuana. Because as it stands, there are approximately 3,000 people convicted of higher level marijuana crimes. So maybe drug trafficking, who remain in federal prison, because this only counts towards people with small possession charges.
Yeah, simple possession.
Simple possession.
Yeah, and there's a threshold, right? If you have too much marijuana on you when you're, arrested, it automatically trips into I think it's possession with intent to distribute. That might not be the exact precise language, but there's just basically it's possession plus, and those possession plus people aren't affected by this order.
Yeah.
It does affect DC. So it could pardon some people who are in the District of Columbia in prison, there. But I've had a really hard time trying to get actual numbers around that. I think your assessment is right. It'll help a lot of people, and on an absolute basis. 6,500 people being able to, rent apartments easier, get jobs easier, get student grants, presumably, other benefits. That's great. But to your point, it is barely scratching the surface of everything that we owe to people who have been arrested or imprisoned for marijuana charges. The other thing is, even at the federal level, it only benefits people who have had their offenses, who have committed the offense, as of the executive order or prior. So if you go out and commit a marijuana offense tomorrow, and at some later date get convicted of it on a federal level, you're not helped by this. Now, you could direct the Department of Justice and the Attorney General not to prosecute that kind of crime on the federal level. So that might, that'll probably prevent that from being a problem during the Biden administration. But it's a Band-Aid.
Yeah. It's a Band-Aid. It absolutely does not go far enough. And most importantly, it doesn't affect anybody in state prisons.
I think that's the biggest thing.
Because as it stands, according to Bloomberg, 32,000 people are the total estimated number of people imprisoned for all cannabis offenses as of 2018.
Yeah.
And of that, 22,000 are in states.
Mm-hmm.
That's 22,000 people that are in jail for cannabis offenses.
Yeah. Yeah. And
states.
So that leads us to kind of the second pillar of his announced approach, which is, I don't even know that you can even call it like a part of the approach. I mean, it's basically he's urging governors to follow his lead and take the same action, because similar to, you got the president, he's the executive of the nation. So on a federal level, he can issue pardons for federal crimes. Governors, who are the executives of their states, can issue pardons for state crimes.
Yeah.
So he's pushing for that to be the case, or for like that to happen. But like, I don't know. So marijuana is already fully legal in 19 states and allowed for medical use in 37 states. 5 more states have it on their ballots for the midterms. So at this point, according to the Washington Post, 74% of the U.S. population has access to some kind of legal weed. Yeah. And about 2 million marijuana convictions have been expunged or pardoned by states where the drug is now legal. So all that to say that, like, there has been progress where we might expect there to be progress, but where there hasn't yet been progress, I don't know that we can expect the governors to heed the Biden administration.
Yeah, yeah. So then the question becomes, how much should we be celebrating this? And how much should we, like, to what extent might we critique this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I do celebrate a little bit the push to review the scheduling of marijuana. So basically, he's pushed the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to initiate a review of the fact that it's currently a Schedule I drug, which puts it in the same league as cocaine and stuff, and heroin and LSD. Yeah. But like a higher scheduled substance than like fentanyl and methamphetamine. So like,
And this specific schedule is reserved for drugs that are considered to have no medical benefit.
Yeah.
Which we know that that's just objectively not true.
Yeah.
All right. Marijuana can be used for medical benefit for several different things.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the descheduling for a second, I guess. Before we kind of get into the political angle of it, let's talk about this. So the idea of rescheduling marijuana. First off, it's unclear if marijuana was rescheduled, what schedule it would be put on. As it stands, the lowest schedule is Schedule 5. All right. And Schedule 5, to put that into perspective, is, like cough syrup, right? Like cough syrup or small amounts of codeine. Like
interesting.
The lowest tier of regulation.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, even if it was scheduled to the lowest tier, that still would not necessarily classify it as a federally legal drug. All right? Because as it stands, the Controlled Substances Act specifically requires that all drugs that have the potential to be abused, with the exception of alcohol and tobacco, have to be put on have to be put on the Controlled Substances Act, meaning that they have to be under one of these schedules. All right. So theoretically, and this is talking specifically about executive action, theoretically, he could just deschedule it altogether. Now, some important factors about descheduling. First off, if it were descheduled, then there would need to be there would still need to be legislative action in order to regulate it. Yeah. Because if it's not under the Controlled Substances Act, then it would have to be put under some type of different law. It would have to be regulated under a different law. And it's also super unlikely that he's going to do that.
Yeah. Even on the campaign trail, he wasn't in favor of doing that.
Yeah. And furthermore, even if he did do that, it still would not necessarily legalize it in every single state.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of leftists talk about what Biden can do about marijuana. And like, if he does make the move to deschedule it completely, I mean, I'll support that to an extent.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the way that marijuana gets legalized federally is probably going to have to be through legislation.
Yeah. I'd say that's right. Yeah, I'm even kind of curious about like legislation versus like state legislation.
Yeah.
Like
Well, that's the other thing. It's probably going to be difficult to justify a federal law that specifically requires states to also have it legal in their state.
typically laws about like substances control and stuff like that. The state can put incremental restrictions above what the federal government puts on something.
Typically.
So like it would be pretty outside of the ordinary for the federal government to say, sorry, states, you can't regulate the trafficking of a controlled substance or even a descheduled like drug in your borders. Yeah. Like that would be pretty uncommon. So like this is probably something that on the bright side, it's something that can be addressed at the state level. On the dark side, it's something that might have to be addressed on the state level. And so by definition, it's going to be a mixed bag.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I think that it still makes sense to try to do a federal law that requires some type of legalization with every state.
Yeah. Or at the very least makes it actually legal federally. So that, states that defer to like the federal law for their state law get affected, or like, at the very least is like leading the way. And you're not going to have people like apologists saying like, well, we could do it at the state level, but you might still get charged at the federal level.
Yeah. See, I would argue that, and maybe this is going too far, but I would even argue that, hell, if we're going to say that there's an implied right of privacy in the Constitution that specifically gives you the right to life, liberty, and property without and it can only be taken away through due process. I mean, a harmless substance that only affects you and affects nobody else, I'd put that under the category of freedom. Mm-hmm. So you know what? I think the Supreme Court should be able to fucking legalize it. I don't know, maybe that's going too far.
The Supreme Court can fucking do that, but
they're not going to.
Ever would. Yeah,
they're not going to.
Not even if it was all staffed with liberal people, probably.
Yeah, which is saying,
I think that's a pretty strong argument.
There's an argument to be made.
Especially, I mean, I think especially in the face of the disparate like outcomes of the war on drugs.
Yeah, that's a good point.
At the very least, on like due process grounds, like it seems like that would be a reasonable move by the Supreme Court if they were inclined to do it. Yeah. So like, and that's part of like the rationale for Biden's move. So he was talking about it in his press release. He was talking about the fact that prison's time for possessing marijuana has upended too many lives and incarcerated people for conduct that many states don't prohibit. And he talked specifically about like the disparate impact of these laws on Black and brown people, despite marijuana like usage at similar rates and all this stuff. And it makes sense because like marijuana is significantly increasing in popularity as like states are, deregulating it, legalizing it, decriminalizing it. Some research from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, in partnership with the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research, found that in 2021, 43% of young adults ages 19 to 30 reported using marijuana.
Yeah.
Like the fact that there's still like ambiguity around this.
Yeah.
Around this like commonplace recreational drug is like really like, is just anachronistic.
How many thousands of people die every year from cigarettes, from alcohol?
Yeah, it's like hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, there have been no recorded deaths attributable solely to marijuana. Like, you don't overdose on marijuana. It just doesn't happen. I mean, I did hear this one story where they killed a mouse with marijuana, but they had to use a shit ton of it. And they also had to drop it from really high.
I was just visualizing like this like little mouse on like a gravity bong or like something, just like getting crazy,
just getting fucked up. Like look, that isn't to say that there might not be some minor health impacts from smoking a lot of marijuana. I mean, you probably shouldn't drink, or you probably shouldn't smoke a fuck ton of it.
Yeah. And I mean,
like every day.
it's smoke. Like,
Yeah, and smoke.
Breathing anything that's not air is worse for your body than breathing air.
Yeah.
But like to be fair, it's not, necessarily like, it's not obviously riddled with the kind of carcinogens that are present in tobacco. And tobacco, I was speaking to a doctor. I met this doctor while I was on vacation, and we were talking about tobacco use. And he was like, "Did you know that like tobacco is an incredibly potent poison? Like if you eat tobacco, a very small amount can kill you." But
Wow.
yeah, it's crazy. Just the amount that you actually are ingesting when you smoke is so much lower than people actually think. But it is an amazingly potent poison. And to your point, Nathan, 480,000 people a year die in the U.S. from tobacco use.
Yeah.
And not a scheduled drug.
Yeah. Not a scheduled drug. Grandfathered in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like all that to say, the case for marijuana, like decriminalization, legalization, seems like pretty freaking clear.
Yeah.
And I think
it's also a winning political issue
Yeah.
because people support it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I totally agree.
So then the question becomes, what political benefit or drawback could this have? I mean, I think that it is not unreasonable to say that Biden did this because midterms are coming up.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I don't think that that is a controversial thing to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, when asked, so the White House did like a press briefing prior to the release of this. And when asked about the specific timing, they said, like a senior White House official said, quote, "I'll just add on to the question about timing. I mean, the president has been clear that our marijuana laws are not working. As I mentioned up top, members of Congress have been working on this issue, but the effort has stalled and we're almost at an end of the Congress. So the president has been considering his options and he's now taking executive action to address the country's failed approach to marijuana." So we've walked through how limited this action actually is in terms of addressing like the deep systemic problems of marijuana, and how is this legislation more stalled now than it's been stalled for the last 2 years? Like I think that's just not a very credulous response, and I think you're right to think that it's a midterms issue.
Then the other question is, does that really matter that much? I mean, at the end of the day, it matters to the extent that they should have done it sooner.
I agree. Yes, totally.
Like, Biden's been president for 2 years now, and that means that's 2 extra years that there were people sitting around unable to get employment because of this bullshit felony charge that they had looming over them. That's 6,500 people that had to go through that for an extra 2 years.
Yeah. And if he actually thinks that governors will be sympathetic, will be swayed by his approach, then that could be a much larger impact that it's had for 2 years, Yeah.
Yeah. But that being said, at the end of the day, he did it and it was the right thing to do, and it's going to help people. So honestly, I care a lot more about results, and this is a good result. I want more results. I want us to keep working towards it. And I love the fact that the conversation about either rescheduling it or, hopefully descheduling it is now becoming a part of the overall conversation. Yeah. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that this was something that he did for a political reason. Yeah. But at the same time, think about it. Like, the reason why it would politically help him is because it's politically popular. Yeah. And when people vote for an elected representative, that representative should represent them, which means they should represent the values of the people that they have. So if somebody does something that people like and that people voted them in hoping that they would do, then I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, so a couple thoughts. One, if this actually helps Democrats keep or get more seats in the House and the Senate in midterms, awesome.
Yeah.
Like, best possible outcome. Like, way more even impactful than like helping 6,500 people. Now, I want to help those people, but like it's like a much bigger impact, honestly, if we were to actually retain control of Congress related to this. But two, like to your point, Nathan, maybe this is a third segment to talk about at some point, but like, I don't care what my politicians believe. I don't care if they're passionately pro-legalization. I care that they're passionately taking action on legalization. I care they're a passionate representative. Like, if the incentives are set up in such a way that they actually represent the people that they're meant to represent, I don't care about them as a person. My problem is when politics is set up so that they're not representing those things. I want the incentives to be set up, and the incentives to be set up are set up in such a way that, if you're authentic, people believe you. If they believe you and think they're authentic, they'll want you to be their representative. And I think that's important. But if Bernie Sanders, in his heart of hearts, didn't believe a word he was saying and just thought this was the most expedient political way to stay in office and to truly represent the people of Vermont, great.
Well, I don't know how much I agree with you on that.
Okay.
Because I guess my thing is the fact that if a person demonstrates clearly that they believe something, that usually means they're going to keep fighting for it.
Yeah.
So
totally.
like for example, during the Democratic primary, there were a lot of people that were claiming that they supported Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
And they seemed to be supporting it because it was popular, and they didn't seem to have any real idea of what it actually was and why people actually like it.
Yeah.
So like you had your Kamala Harris, you had Kirsten Gillibrand, you had Cory Booker, all saying they supported it, but when it came down to it, they either flipped or they didn't really have a lot of substantive things to say about it. Mm-hmm. Whereas people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, they very clearly did have more substance on each of those issues and were able to talk about it more. So the fact that they seemed to clearly actually believe it translated into them fighting for it more.
Sure. So I think I totally take that point. I didn't mean to say I don't care if people passionately fight for something. I think the best representation of my viewpoint is if there was Bernie and then evil Bernie, and they were exactly the same. They were passionate fighters, and one of them was just, doing it because he thought it was the way to stay elected, and one of them was doing it because he thought it, or maybe not elected, maybe elected and be a representative. And the other person was doing it because he really believed in Medicare for all. Like, I don't really, I would equally cast a vote. Way. Same way they're fighting for it. Yeah. Okay. Like, I get that. No impact on like consequences.
I get that.
Because to me, it's all about the consequences.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what's going on in their I don't mind.
Care about their brain.
I get that. I get that.
I do care a little about Biden's brain because I want it to be there.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, I think you're right. I'm okay if it's about political expediency and like getting something like an issue on the table that's popular with that like Democrats win on, and that'll help us in the midterms. I think that's great. I think like a lot of the headlines have been really praising this, which I think is fine. But to your point, and what we kind of have emphasized throughout is like, this is way weaker than you would assume based on the coverage if you're just reading headlines. And like, still in like 2020, like 350,000 people were arrested for marijuana related offenses. 91% of those offenses were possession only. Like, according to the ACLU, between 2001 and 2010, 8.2 million marijuana arrests took place. 88% of those were just possession. Like, there's just so much more to be done here. But I'll take any step we can get, and hopefully it keeps some seats in the midterms.